Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
The cradle of Western thought, so that the early Greek philosophers were actually Ionians. So the question becomes, where is Ionia? Because if they were influenced by this, then it's important to know what influenced these first philosophers. The Ionian cosmology influenced the great poet Homer and the first philosophers. We now lived in cities governed by laws, and we figured the universe must be governed by laws too. Think about that for a moment. If we live in this society now that we have a bit of a hierarchy within which, every society has a hierarchy with its king or whoever's at the top of the hierarchy who's giving the rest of us the rules. Yeah, so we have rules for one another that we follow. Doesn't it seem true that the universe follows certain rules too? I mean, look at the seasons. Year after year we have the same sorts of things happening. The trees come out green and flower, and then in the fall the leaves fall off. What happens the next year? Blossoms again, and the next fall they fall off again. I mean, it's just, there seem to be certain laws that are governing nature. Children, it seems that babies are born in one state, in one size, and then they grow up, and then they become adults, and then did you notice that they become senior adults? And, it's sort of like there are these laws that govern what happens to us, right? The ancients had this outlook of the human being. They said, their question, one of their riddles was, what has four legs, then 2 legs, then 3 legs? What has 4 legs, then 2 legs, then 3 legs?
Man.
The human person, right? When we're first born, we're crawling on all 4s, and then eventually we learn to walk on 2 legs, and then when we get just a little beyond Father Jamie's age, we need to start using a cane or something to walk with 3, right? So how it is that the ancients were seeing how it is that there are various changes, but it seems like there's something universal, because this is not just something that happens to Father Jamie, going from 4 legs to 2 legs to 3 legs. It seems to happen to lots of us, right? That we all started off crawling, and we're all walking on 2 legs today. Got news for you. We're all heading toward the 3-leg stage. So the Ionians believed that there were certain laws that governed the universe, right? It's not this randomness, but that there are certain things that are determining how things turn out. We were occupied by nature, because isn't it true? Have any of us ever looked up at night, for instance, and watched the stars? You can see the stars moving, or you can see the sun moving across the sky, and then we can get up the next day and watch the sun move across the sky again the next day, right? And so they were just trying to figure out, what are these things that are moving, and are they still moving the same way? Because the sun seemed in the summer to be a little more toward the north, and in the winter it seemed to be more toward the north, in the summer it seemed to be more toward the south. Is that just my perception, or is there something changing about the sun throughout the year? So the ancients were noticing these laws and just simply trying to figure them out. There were various Oriental influences on their thinking. So that, for instance, math, did the Greeks invent math? Actually, they stole a lot of their mathematic concepts from the Egyptians. The Egyptians had a problem because the Nile flooded every year. So what do I do if my field was here and Sandra's field was there, but then the flood came? Now how do I know where my field stops and her field starts? Or do we just keep arguing as neighbors for the rest of eternity, right? I mean, we had to come up with some sort of math to be able to figure out how it is that we're going to delineate my field from her field. So we got some math from the Egyptians. A lot of our astronomy we got from the Babylonians, which is modern-day Iraq. I put there the Akkadian. It was the center of the Akkadian Empire. Do you remember that? The Akkadians, what did the Akkadians give us? They gave us the great gift of a day off every week, right? Oh. The Sabbath comes from the Akkadians, which is why we love the Akkadians, because they had an unlucky number, which was the number 7. Mm-hmm. So if the 7 is unlucky, thou shalt not work on the 7th day. Thank God the Hebrews learned that from the Akkadians, right? Stole that from the Akkadians so that we'd at least be resting one day a week. So it was from the Akkadians or the Babylonians that we learned astronomy, which simply means that we started noticing how it was that certain things like eclipses, how interesting that this person said there was an eclipse in this year, and then this person said there was an eclipse in this year, and then there's an eclipse in this year. Wow, based on that, we could probably guess when the next eclipse is going to be. You follow that? And why? Because again, nature seems to be following these laws. For instance, there's going to be an eclipse every so many years. Fascinating. So, we were learning this, the Babylonians, the only difference with the Babylonians is that they were studying astronomy not for the purpose of science, but more for the purpose of divination or astrology. Simply so that we could see, okay, well, under what star was Margie born? So that we can see, try to predict something about Margie's future based on her stars, right? Mm-hmm. That was the Babylonians. It was the Greeks who took all that and really started to make it a science of astronomy. The Greeks then, says Father Fred, stand as the uncontested original thinkers and scientists of Europe. They were the first thinkers and scientists in Europe. They first sought knowledge for its own sake, and they pursued knowledge in a scientific, free, and unprejudiced spirit. Unprejudiced simply meaning unbiased, right? We tend to think that the way that we believe is the right way to believe. I, Father Jamie, believe this, so everyone in this room should see it the way that I see it. Wait a minute, that's being biased. That's being prejudiced, right? So the Greeks were doing this in an unprejudiced way. And what's so great about the Greeks is that they didn't have a priestly class in their religion. Follow me now. What did the Jews have? The Jews had a priestly class. What is the role of the priest again? The priest is the mediator between God and the people. Oh, yikes. So what happens once you have priests? The priests start telling the people what God wants them to do and what God says. Oh. Aren't you glad it's the 21st century? So in the ancient world, the priest was mediator between God and people, which simply meant that if God was going to speak to the people, it was going to be through a person like Moses or through one of the priests. Oh. Did the Greeks have priests? No, not in the same sense. So what did that simply mean then? We didn't have to rely on a priestly class to know anything about the gods. Right? If we're going to know something about the gods, we don't have to wait for Father Jamie to tell us about the gods. Let's talk about the gods even though Father Jamie isn't here. Right? We don't need Father Jamie to talk about the gods. The impartiality of the Greeks as they regarded the world about them. So they were very impartial, right? They just tried to look at the world more objectively. And also their sense of reality and their power of abstraction enabled them to recognize their religious ideas for what they really are. Now these are Father Fred's words, not Father Jamie's. Creations of an artistic imagination. That's what the Greeks arrived at. Think about it for a moment, because they were taught to believe as kids that up on Mount Olympus there were all these gods up on the mountain. And so what happens when the first person gets up to the top of the mountain and looks around and is all excited to meet the gods and finds no one there? What do you do with that? And so for the ancient Greeks, that was the struggle that they had. You know, that we have all these stories of these gods living on Mount Olympus. But once you climb Mount Olympus and see that there's no one there, what are you left to believe about the gods? That they are creations of artistic imagination. Someone made that up. Because I went up that mountain, didn't find anyone. So unless they're hiding, there are no gods up there on that mountain. So far so good? So what we'll find with Greek philosophy is that the Greeks had all sorts of myths about different gods and goddesses and people. But what happens when those myths don't stand up to what it is that we know and believe? We'll come to an example of that in a moment, but I'll just raise it right now. In Spanish, the word that we use for rainbow is arco iris. Where does arco iris come from? Arco means arc. Okay, so arc makes sense. Arco iris, why do we say iris? Because Iris was the Greek god was a Greek messenger god. Ooh, follow me now. So Iris was a Greek messenger god. So the Arco-Iris was the ark on which the messenger god came down to talk to human beings before going back up into heaven. The Arco-Iris, right? But what happens when we keep seeing the rainbow and seeing the rainbow, I'm not seeing Iris. I see Iris's ark, but are you seeing Iris on the ark? Right? I mean, we start questioning these things. My parents told me that Iris comes down on Iris's ark, the rainbow, and I'm seeing Iris's ark, but I tell you what, I have sat out here since the moment that rainbow appeared, and I'm not seeing Iris. Santa Claus, right? I've heard various stories of Santa Claus, and I wait by that chimney, and I tell you what, I have yet to see Santa. We hear certain stories, but they have to fit with our own experience. So what were some of the characteristics of these Ionian philosophers? First of all, they were really impressed with change, right? How it is that things change. How it is that people grow, or born, and grow, and then start to slow down and ultimately succumb to death. Every single person goes through this. Whoa. Even my child who was born yesterday is going through these natural laws. When they were born in this state, they're going to come older and one day they're going to walk, and then one day they're going to become old and have difficulty walking, and ultimately their body's going to break down. We all go through this. The Ionians were impressed with this. You know, these ideas of decay and death. You know, okay, what happens to a person after the person dies? It seems the spirit goes out of the body, and then what happens to the body? The body starts to decay. Something happens there, right? The Ionians were just trying to figure out what's happening here. There seem to be certain things that work in this world, right? The spring and the autumn in nature, how it is that trees blossom and turn green, and in the fall the leaves fall off again. There are just certain cycles in nature. The Ionians were conscious of the dark side of our existence as well, how it is that in this world there's uncertainty and insecurity and death and war and hatred and all sorts of bad, dark, evil things. They were aware of that as well. Which is why a person like Theognis of Megara, what did he say? He said, the best for us were not to have been born and not to have seen the light of the sun. It would have been better not to have been born. Yikes. Very existentialist. A lot of people would come back and have similar thoughts throughout the history of humankind. But if once born, what's the second best option for us? That we die as speedily as possible.
Oh, that is so nice.
It's a person like Theognis who's looking at this and saying, wait a minute, did you ever notice? All these people go from being four-legged, crawling, and then to standing up and walking, and then becoming older and having to use canes, and then ultimately one day giving up the ghost. One day, I'm going to have to give up the ghost. Yeah. One day, every single person in this room and every single person in our parish is going to give up the ghost. Every single one of those 7 billion people on earth is going to do this. There's just something about this law of nature. This thought would be carried by later existentialists, people like Miguel de Unamuno and all sorts of great 19th and 20th century existentialists who say it would have been better for us never to have been born, but now that we're born, we have to figure out what do we do with this existence, this sad, tragic existence of being able to look forward to walking with a cane, and one day after that, not even walking, right? How do we deal with this? This was echoed in Sophocles, 5th century BC. He was already saying, not to have been born exceeds every reckoning. Better for us not to have been born. Ancient Greeks were saying these things. So if you have children or grandchildren or neighbors or friends or anyone who says that they're atheist or agnostic or anything else, yeah, they're not the first person in the history of humanity. Hello, there were people back then who were saying all sorts of thing. I mean, it's part of the human journey, is us trying to figure out who we are and what all of this means in this world in which we inhabit. The Greeks, the other thing about the Ionian philosophers, they were driven by success and strength and an unscrupulous will to power. We have certain great words in English like strategy. Where do we get the word strategy from? The Greeks. The Greeks, what was strategy about? It's about how to win wars. The Greeks wanted to win wars, and so they developed strategy. The Greeks they knew that there was something about power, and they were going to have it. The Greek Empire ruled a lot of the world for so long, simply because, I mean, we have this, how it is that people are asserting their strength over other people. One of the examples here is the Melian dialogue. It's worth our taking a moment to be able to talk about this because, so Thucydides wrote a book called The History of the Peloponnesian War, and in this long book there is a dialogue, which if you ever get a chance, it's a few pages long, but it's worth reading, the Melian dialogue, where this is the predicament. In the island of Melos, we have the Melians, who are now surrounded by Athenian ships. And the Athenian ambassadors come onto the island and say, oh, by the way, you're outnumbered. You are at our mercy. We can crush you if we'd like. What are the Melians going to do? They're going to bargain for anything they can get, right? They're going to talk about how it is that, oh, you don't want to mess with us, because if you mess with us, the Spartans are going to come in and they're going to get you, right? What happens in the end of the dialogue? The end of the dialogue, the Athenians win. They kill all of the boys and the men who are of military age. All of the women and children are enslaved. The island is repopulated. Why? Because those with power will always use their power to stay in power.
Yeah. Still going on.
Still goes on in every institution that I know of. From families, think about it for a moment, right? Parents, as parents, we will say and do certain things simply because, why? Because I'm the parent,
you're the child.
And you're the child. You will listen to me. Why? Because I'm your parent. In the church, right? You will listen to me because I am the bishop. Or I am the pope, or whatever, right? I mean, in every institution, those in power do what they do what they must to regain power. Cool. Community organizers study this story of the Melians. Why? Because it's an important lesson on how it is that, so what do you do against the Athenians, the powerful forces of the world? If you're the small guy, the weak guy, the poor guy, what do you do against all of these large, organized, moneyed interests in this world, like the Athenians? You're going to be crushed. So community organizers learn that power comes from one of two sources. You have to organize people, or you have to organize resources, like money. Every elected official in office, why is he or she in office? Because he or she organized people, get out and vote for him or her, and or the money that in turn got the people to vote for that person. If you want power, community organizers say there's one of two ways to do it: organize people or organize money. They study this dialogue, the Melian dialogue, simply because it's a lesson on how it is that the Greeks in that context were learning that for them, might made right. If you were strong and powerful and organized all these resources, you were going to stay in power. That's the Greek world in which these Greek philosophers were philosophizing now. So the Athenians, who are now the strong people, are going to take over the island and say, for of the gods we believe and of men we know that by a law of their nature, wherever they can rule, they will. Wherever a person can rule, that person will rule. This law was not made by us, Athenians, and we are not the first who have acted upon it. We did but inherit it, and we shall bequeath it to all time And we know that you and all humanity, if you were as strong as us, you would do as we do. Oh.
Yes.
Think about that statement of human nature. If you were, it's true.
Yeah.
We tell our kids, right? You will do that. Why? Because I said so. We say that as parents. What's going to happen now when they grow up and become parents?
Same thing.
The same thing is going to happen. Why? The Athenians foretold that centuries ago, right? If you were in my position as a parent, you would say the same thing. If you don't believe it, wait till you get to be a parent, right? One day you will find yourself telling your child what I'm just telling you. So how the story turned out, we've already talked about with the Athenians killing all the Melians of military age. I mean, it's about how those with power, which is what was happening in Greece, you know, they now had an empire. How are they going to keep their empire, the empire of the world? But there's also this term in Greek, they called it hubris. What is hubris? It's essentially when you're stepping a little farther than you were meant to step, right? The fates will allow you to do so much. Maybe the fates will allow you to conquer that island, but then when you go off and think that you're going to go off and conquer all the islands, the question is, do the fates wish that for you? Is it your destiny? Margie is now the captain of our army. Is it the fate? Is it our fate, Captain Margie, that we go and conquer every single island? Or is there someone you need to consult to figure out? Because if you overstep, what's going to happen? You're going to get slapped by the fates, right?
Yeah.
So you want to exert your strength and go as far as you can, but be careful. You don't want to overstep. That would be hubris. So there are two sides, it seems, of Greek character and culture. This is Father Fred speaking. There's the side of moderation and of art and of Apollo and the Olympian deities, all these beautiful things in Greece. But let's just be honest, there's also this other darker side, this side of excess and unbridled self-assertion and Dionysian frenzy. I mean, there's a dark side of Greek culture as well that the Greek philosophers were struggling to get a handle on. The beginning of Ionian philosophy. So now, that's a bit on the context. So now let's actually go into the philosophy. The first people who started thinking through these issues were thinking, there must be something permanent, because even though we see these changes that keep happening, there's still this permanent element. So that, for instance, there's all this change and transition in life. People are born as babies, and then they crawl, and then they walk, and then they use canes, and then they go to the Lord, right? There's certain change in people, but at the same time, there must be something that continues. We used the example last week with Deacon John, right? That cute photo that we saw of Deacon John as a child, right? Wait a minute, is that Deacon John? Mm-hmm. We look at that photo because on the one hand, it looks very different. Something has changed. Something has changed. But on the other hand, something has remained the same. And he will insist that that is him. No, really, that's me in that photo. So something about him has changed, but something about him has stayed the same. So the change must be from something into something else. Do you notice in that photo, Deacon John is one thing. We might call it a boy. Now he's another thing. We might call it a man. We change from one thing into something else. That seemed to be an initial insight that they had. They also had this insight that there must be something primary that persists. So what is it about human beings that is constant, that is shared by those infants and children and men and senior adults, because all of them share something in common, even though they're very different. Infants are crawling on 4 legs. The senior adult is walking around with a cane. It's very different. They're different sizes. The infant is this tall, the senior adult's, I mean, they're very different, but there's something about them that remains the same. There must be something that persists. something that takes on forms and undergoes a process of change. There must be something about Deacon John that's been constant since the day of his conception or the day of his birth, which has remained the same even though his body and other things have kept changing. So the question is, what is the primitive element? For Thales, it's going to be water. Everything is made of water. For Anaximenes, it's going to be air. Everything is made out of air. For Heraclitus, everything's going to be made out of fire. So we're going to have to figure out what it is that these different things have in common. What is it that everything in this world has in common despite its differences? For instance, Heraclitus is going to say everything is made out of fire to different degrees. That chair that you're sitting on has fire in it, right? Sandra has fire. The paper that you hold has fire. Everything is composed of fire. Oh, interesting. What's interesting about the Greeks is that they hadn't yet come up to this division between spirit and matter. So as Christians and as Catholics, we're used to talking about the spiritual and the material. The Greeks didn't have that insight yet, right? That the chair is material, that the paper is material, but there are some things that are spiritual that you can't see. Things like God, right? If God is spiritual, then we can't see God, taste God, smell God. God is spiritual. But the Greeks didn't yet have this insight. For them, everything was material. But ultimately, they believed that the universe had to be governed by certain laws and by balance rather than ego or caprice. I love the word balance. We've talked about the word balance before. Balance comes from two Greek words, bis and lanx. Bis is the Greek word for Greek root for two. A bicycle has how many wheels? Two. Bis. Lanx is the word for bowl or plate. Two plates or two bowls. You all remember back in 8th grade what a balance is in 8th grade? Do we teach balances in what grade? I'm thinking 8th grade or so I learned about balances. A balance was this instrument with two plates, right? And you put an object on one plate and it weighs it down, and then you put weights on the other plate until you see it balances, right? And if I put a rock on that side and I put weights that equal 3 pounds on the other side and it balances, then the rock equals or weighs 3 pounds. So far so good? What is it like in life if there's no balance, right? For people who are, for instance, are always focused on work, there's no balance in their life. Work is their focus. Their life is out of balance. The challenge with balance then is making sure that the two plates are balanced, are in line. So that's the Greek conception of it, that the universe must be governed by balance and by these laws that we see in different ways.